Thank you so much, Bruce. It's such an honor to have someone like you in our community. Next up, I want to introduce Rick Hauer. We are so lucky to have Rick Hauer here to speak. Not only is he a worldwide stream ecologist, but also in the area of the Lakeside Sewer and Water District's groundwater discharge permit, where a sensitive aquifer is located, as Bruce just said. We hired Rick to evaluate this plan of theirs and what the impacts of this expansion might be. So we are so honored to have him here tonight to talk about the importance of this aquifer and protecting Flathead's water quality. But we put all of this information in front of DEQ before they made their decision. DEQ chose to stay. There was still no significant impact. We think after you hear Rick talk tonight, you will understand why this is not a sound conclusion, if you don't already understand from Bruce's talk. And that's why we've decided to go to court. We understand that a solution for septic waste is needed, but this is the absolute worst location possible. And we will continue to look at and advocate for other solutions, such as biosolids to energy. Dr. F. Richard Rick Hauer is Professor Emeritus and Distinguished Professor at the University of Montana. He taught stream ecology and mentored graduate students at Flathead Lake Biological Station from 1986 to 2018, and held the Stream and River Ecology Endowed Chair for 16 of those years until his retirement. As a graduate student in the 1970s, his work on the North Fork was used in the IJC Reference of the then proposed Cabin Creek coal mine just north of Glacier Park. 25 years later, his work led to the Memorandum of Understanding between BC and Montana for a coal mine in the North Fork. Rick's research has extended across the Americas from the Bering Sea in western Alaska to the southern tip of South America in Patagonia. He has published more than 125 research articles in international peer-reviewed journals such as Science Advances, BioScience, Freshwater Science, and Frontiers in Science, and published 5 books in stream ecology. He is considered one of the preeminent river ecologists in the world. So please welcome Dr. Rick Hauer.
Thank you, Cameron, and thank you for all of you for being here. Clearly the reason you are here is because you care about where you live. And at hand, Bruce and Mary are also clearly, they've been heroes of mine for, almost 50 years. So I can hardly stand not just giving them another round of applause. So I want to talk to you about rivers, how they happen to be key to preserving nature, biodiversity, and human well-being here in the Flathead and elsewhere around the world. Let's see, make this work. Supposed to work. That worked.
I don't like when you say your voice
Okay.
Oh, you're welcome.
In getting started, I can't help it at least to start off by being a bit of a professor. I apologize in advance. But this was an article that just recently appeared within the last day or two. The lead off of this was taken directly off of KPAC's writer. They're citizens. That's Citizens for a Better Flathead. That's you. And the tribes fight new sewage plant near Flathead Lake. A complaint alleges the DEQ issues a discharge permit for new wastewater facility without properly analyzing how nutrients could degrade Flathead Lake. So one of the things that people don't really realize is when we're talking about nutrients, they kind of flip around the term phosphorus and nitrogen without really recognizing why that's such a problem. phosphorus. It's an essential life growth element. It is central to DNA, to RNA. It's part of that double helix chain. Without phosphorus, things can't grow. Nitrogen is also an essential life growth nutrient. It is a central element in amino acids, proteins, enzymes, structure, and also the ADP-ATP exchange of energy within our cells. And it's all of us, all the way from algae and bacteria, all the way up to us. We all do fundamentally the same thing. That means that when we excrete our waste, we do so, and what we're excreting is the phosphorus and nitrogen that algae, everybody else uses. If there's too much, you end up with way too much growth, and that growth becomes noxious. I'm going to now flip this. I'm going to come back and visit this again at the end, because a lot of folks don't know how really connected these river systems are and how dependent our entire biodiversity is on how these river systems work. So the rivers and floodplains of the Flathead look like this. And you've probably seen this driving up the North Fork. You know what this looks like. They're all over the planet in mountain landscapes. The rivers and floodplains actually think of them as something like this. Here's Lake McDonald. Anybody here not seen Lake McDonald? How about this place? This is the Nyack floodplain. Geologically and geomorphically, these are very, very similar. You have a basin on the left, full of water. It's about 14 kilometers long, 2 kilometers wide, about 450 feet deep. The Nyack floodplain is about 12 kilometers long, 1.5 kilometers wide, and about 150 meters or 450 feet to bedrock. These are the same thing, only the one on the right is full of sediment, with a river flowing over the top of it and interacting with those subsurface sediments. It looks like this. So here's the same thing. On the right is a LiDAR image of the Nyack. Zoom in a little bit, looks like this. What we're actually seeing here is if you cut away on the, look at the image on this image on the left. Look where that river has been over the last several millennia. It is all over the floodplain. Rivers are highly dynamic systems. They produce power. They interact with the geology or the material they're flowing over. They cut it, they fill it, they move it around, they cut trees down, put them in the river. That becomes part of the habitat for fish. It becomes part of the geomorphology of the system and how it works. So the river is moving, banging around from one side of the valley to the other, and underneath it is gravel that has been deposited. What you see On the image on the top right is a drawing of an esker. An esker is a geologic formation left behind by a glacier where the river is flowing up into the ice. So it's a river on the underside of a glacier. When the glacier finally melts and goes away, it leaves behind an esker. The bottom picture is an esker being excavated for gravel. Probably a good use, better than being down in the river bottom, right? So this is up on the landscape, but look at the layers of different kinds of sediment that is underneath that river and now placed on top of the landscape. What you see on the right is what's underneath the rivers when we go out and we're walking around out on our rivers. When you walk onto the floodplain, you are walking onto the river. You think, let's walk down to the river. We don't just walk down to the river, we're walking on the floodplain for, the last 20, 30 minutes before we actually get to the channel component of the river. So here's back at the Nyack floodplain. One of the things that we have, radon is an element. It is an element that you don't want in your basement, but it's great to be able to track it because it is radioactive and it is a gas. It dissolves in water. What you see here is, in residence times, pure water on the surface, no radon in it. As water goes into the subsurface, it begins to pick up radon. So if you pull water out in the floodplain, away from the channel, you can tell how long that water has been in the subsurface. So this is really a critical thing to understand. This water that's leaving the channel and going subsurface, we have found hundreds of meters away from the channel in less than a day. Typical groundwaters might move a couple of meters a day at best. In river-influenced deposits, the water moves extraordinarily fast. So when you look at something like this, you go, wow, this is really absolutely gorgeous. We happen to live in one of the most beautiful, I've been all over the world. This is as beautiful as it gets anywhere. When I see something like this, I go, oh, wow, this is really something. That's the floodplain. It's not just down where the river is, or even where the river scoured last year. It's extending way out, basically from valley wall to valley wall. The river is, of course, flowing down, but the river also is going laterally. It floods, it moves, the channels are moving, it's moving around on that floodplain. And all water is also going subsurface, it's going into the gravel, it's traveling 100 meters or 200 meters or 500 meters and coming back to the surface, and it pops up in different places. You ever wonder why there's spring brooks out on floodplains? Where do you think that water's coming from? It's not coming from up on the slope. It's coming from water out of the channel through old paleo channels, things that we call preferential flow pathways. and it goes through these preferential flow pathways, and then pops to the surface in places where there's old paleochannels. Places where the river used to flow and it now has moved out, it's now flowing in a new place. Here is a little cartoon of what this really is, what's really going on. You've got water penetrating out of the river, going through what we call a hyporeic zone. That's a fancy science word for hypo. You know what? You all know what hypo means. It's like a hypodermic needle. So it goes underneath the dermis, right? Hyporeic. This is the under river. When you go out and look at the rivers, like in the fall, and you're looking at this thing, about 10% is out on the surface at any one moment. Most of the water is down in the gravels and flowing. Okay. Well, that's all very interesting, but why should you really care? Well, there's a lot of biogeochemical cycling taking place down there. That means that things are getting trapped and they're getting cycled by bacteria and fungi. It's releasing phosphorus and nitrogen. There's an increase in bioavailability of those growth nutrients of phosphorus and nitrogen. And that results in algae growing more where the water is coming back to the surface than where it's going down. Very natural phenomenon. It should be happening. You'll see this back in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. You see it in the Middle Fork, you see it in the North Fork, where there's all very, very little human pollution. It directly affects the aquatic insects in the upwelling zones where they're mostly feeding on algae. Those bugs get bigger than where in the downwelling zone is. Only 100 meters away. So you've got a channel that's flowing along, aquatic insects on the bottom. Those eating algae get bigger in the upwelling zone, and they're smaller in the downwelling zone. And you get just the opposite of that for the aquatic insects that eat stuff that gets trapped. So as the water's going in, it's filtering, and the organisms that eat that. There's a difference between the biodiversity of our plants on a floodplain, between where the water is going in and where it's coming out of the gravels. Where it's going in, the biodiversity is lower on the same floodplain. So this groundwater surface water interaction is extraordinarily important for our plant biodiversity in our region. Spawning of our fish. Fish spawn where there's groundwater surface water interaction taking place. That whole thing about where I'm talking about where the water goes in, and this is the reason why it's important. It's integral to the maintaining of our fisheries. So here's a floodplain, the floodplain in the left. On the right is the picture of the same place. Here. Right? The edge of the floodplain is in white. Here are the locations of groundwater coming back to the surface. And there are the locations of where bull trout are spawning. Our bird populations. This is extraordinary. We have somewhere around 235 species of birds in western Montana. Of the 235 species, over 200 of them are directly connected to riparian zones for some essential part of their life history. And about half of those are obligate nesters in riparian zones. We destroy these things, we lose our bird populations. So it's not just something, water is not just what we drink. It is so integral, not just to life in terms of how we easily think about, oh, water is life. It is so way beyond how we typically think about it. Way beyond. And we just sometimes cavalierly think that we can put in sewer plants in the wrong place and there's nothing going to happen. These things must be selected. Where they get placed is critically important to our entire well-being as humans, as well as the biodiversity that we're actually so incredibly dependent on. We can't live without nature. We just can't. And this idea of, well, we'll screw it up here and go to Mars, it's like cuckoo-ville. It's not just the little things. Ungulates and wolves. So here are elk and their spatial frequency. They're down on the floodplain. No great surprise. So are the wolves. Wolves go where the elk go. Right? Those stars are the locations of where wolves, in this particular study, have killed elk. They kill the elk down on the floodplain. It's extraordinary. Like 90% of elk kills by wolves are down on floodplains. Also turns out wolves, again, down on floodplains. Everything's going on down on the floodplain. It is literally the arena where wildlife is being concentrated. This is what happens, and this is the elk and the wolves. Look where they're running. They're running up and down the floodplains, right? Up and down the river, up and down this water system. So instead of thinking about, oh, look at the water, think of it as a tube that has an above ground surface component to it. It has an underground component to it. And flowing through that in the channel is a river that is exchanging not only with the subsurface, but it's also exchanging above surface with its atmosphere. How many times have you gone down to the river because it's cooler? You know, go down to the river. Let's go down to the river. How about these guys? Critical grizzly bear habitat. You think I'm going to pay attention to that? Forget it. Grizzly bear habitat. Grizzly bears use floodplains extensively. Watch this. Here is the North Fork. Here are the floodplains on the North Fork. During May, or late April, May, and June, that's where the grizzly bears are. Right there. It's also where the groundwater surface water interaction is taking place and where bull trout spawn in the fall. Okay. River floodplains are key to preserving nature and biodiversity in mountain landscapes, all the way from microbes, all the way around to grizzly bears. Paradoxically, they also are disproportionately unprotected where human developments are concerned. Which brings us to a little discussion here at the end. And that is what we have going on in the suit that Citizens for a Better Flathead are bringing against DEQ. You're all familiar with what you're seeing here. It's the Flathead Valley. On the red on the right, is the size of that underground aquifer that connects to the river. It is so expansive that when you are landing in your airplane trip on Glacier International Airport, you are landing on top of the Flathead River. It is that extensive. When we get down here into the lower valley, it was laid down a little bit differently. It's a subaqueous deltaic plain that was laid down by the river at the end of the last glacial period. The river was all over that valley. Where the arrow is the location, the current location of a reasonably sized sewage treatment facility operating in 1970s, 1980s technology. Pond system with surface irrigation. What is proposed is to quadruple, maybe even increase by an order of magnitude the amount of water, sewage coming in, and allowing it then to infiltrate direct injection into the sands in the subsurface. Here's the location, generally. This is another LiDAR image. This gives you an idea of how hyper-connected this is. This is not just a pile of sand that's all homogeneous and we're going to be able to put wastewater on it and that wastewater isn't going to go anywhere. What's going to happen is that it will find the easiest pathway on site. Total inadequate job on the front end decided to do this here and the justifications for it. Their own wells, one of the experimental wells to determine how fast the water moves came up with an estimate of 500 feet a day. The distance to the closest surface water that is connected to Wiley Slough, that's connected to Ashley Creek, that's then connected directly to the Flathead River. You know this. You guys live here. You know what this is. You drive around on the surface and ever go, oh, look at how the river used to go over here. How could you miss it? Right? What people don't necessarily realize is those are all preferential flow pathways in the subsurface. They're not just a surface expression of an old meander scroll. In the subsurface are sands that were sorted and have high preferential flow to them. So if you mound up the water, it's got to go someplace and it's going to go down the French drain. You know what French drains are? Most people do. They know what a French drain is. It goes downhill, right? It's going to go downhill. It's going to go down to Wiley Slough. It's going to go down to the lake. It's going to go down to the river. And a lot of the things that happen to be going into our sewage is not processed. PFAS. These are chemicals that sometimes they're called forever chemicals. The reason they're called forever chemicals is there is no biological metabolism of the stuff. They last forever. Caffeine, because everybody loves their coffee. Hormones, because women don't want to get pregnant, so they take birth control pills. There's nothing, it just doesn't get processed at the sewage treatment plant, and so it's going down into our waters. The things that are going into our waters, pharmaceuticals, are getting into our waters. These are all things that directly affect, particularly our surface waters and our drinking waters. And we got to keep the sewage water out of it until they're thoroughly processed. And it's not going to be cheap. I mean, we have been living on the cheap for a long time. And it's really unfortunate, but it's true. Preferential flow paths, up to 50 feet a day. Nutrients N and P coming out of the sewage treatment plant are roughly 1,000 times what is the background level for Flathead River and Flathead Lake. 1,000